My name is Priscilla Fairmont. I'm 28 years old. 3 days after I told my family I was pregnant, I was standing in a hospital hallway, clutching discharge papers that confirmed I'd lost my baby. That's when I saw my father walking toward me with a bouquet of white roses, a practiced look of concern on his face. But his first words weren't, "I'm sorry." They weren't, "How are you feeling?" He looked at my empty belly, smiled slightly, and said, "It's probably for the best. Now you can come home. No complications." That was the moment I finally understood. I had never been his daughter. I was evidence of a mistake he'd been trying to erase for 28 years. What my father didn't know was that I'd already pressed record on my phone. And what he definitely didn't know was that my grandmother, dead for 2 years now, had anticipated this exact moment. She'd left me something far more valuable than sympathy. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. To understand how I ended up in that hospital hallway, I need to take you back to Christmas morning and to the dining room where I learned exactly what my father thought of me. The Ashworth family home sits on 3 acres in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, a Tudor-style estate that my grandmother Vivian built with her first husband 60 years ago. Every Christmas morning, the extended family gathers there for brunch, a tradition that survived even after Grandma Vivian passed 2 years ago. I arrived with Daniel, my fiancé, just as the December sun was catching the frost on the boxwood hedges. His hand found mine as we walked up the flagstone path. "You okay?" he asked. "Ask me again in 3 hours." My father's Lexus ES was parked in the circular driveway, positioned at the center as always, as if the house, the land, and everything in it already belonged to him. I touched the silk scarf at my neck, the Hermes print my mother had worn in every photograph I have of her. It was the only thing of hers I'd been allowed to keep. Inside, the dining room gleamed with the weight of 5 generations. The Wedgwood china, cream with delicate blue borders, had been in my grandmother's family since before the Civil War. 12 place settings, crystal stemware catching the light from the bay windows, candles from diptyque that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Aunt Patricia was already seated, scrolling through her phone. My cousin Bradley nodded at me without looking up. My father stood by the sideboard, inspecting the spread as if taking inventory. And there, in his usual chair, was Uncle Thomas, my mother's younger brother, the only person at this table who had ever looked at me like I belonged. He caught my eye and smiled. It was small, but it was real. I didn't know it yet, but that smile would mean everything in the weeks to come. I was 12 years old when my mother died, ovarian cancer, the kind that whispers through your body for months before anyone thinks to listen. By the time they found it, she had 6 weeks left. She spent most of them apologizing to me for things I didn't understand. The day of her funeral, my father pulled me aside in the church vestibule. I thought he was going to say something comforting. Instead, he gripped my shoulder, too hard, and leaned down until his face was inches from mine. "Your mother trapped me," he said. "She got pregnant on purpose so I'd have to marry her. Don't ever think I stayed because I wanted to. I stayed because I had no choice." I was 12. I didn't understand what trapped meant. I didn't understand why he was telling me this while my mother's casket sat 30 feet away. But I understood the look in his eyes. Resentment. Relief. After that day, I learned to make myself small. I chose a career he considered beneath the family. Elementary school teacher, the kind of job that barely paid rent on my studio apartment in Stamford. I visited only when required. I spoke only when spoken to. Daniel was the first person who ever made me feel like I deserved to take up space. We'd been together 3 years when I found out I was pregnant. 10 weeks along on Christmas morning. I hadn't told anyone except Daniel and my doctor. Part of me, the foolish 12-year-old part that never stopped hoping, believed that a grandchild might change something. That maybe, after 16 years, my father would finally look at me and see family instead of evidence. I was wrong. But I had to learn that the hard way. My grandmother Vivian was the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough. She died 2 years before that Christmas, at 82, sharp as a tack until the very end. The cancer that took her was faster than my mother's, 3 months from diagnosis to death. But Grandma Vivian used every one of those days deliberately. The last time I visited her, she was sitting up in the hospital bed, paperwork spread across her lap like she was running a board meeting. When I walked in, she waved the nurse away and patted the edge of the mattress. "Priscilla," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I need you to remember something." I sat down, held her hand. The skin felt like paper, but her grip was iron. "When the time comes," she told me, "go to Margaret Holloway. She has what you'll need." Margaret Holloway was Grandma Vivian's attorney, had been for 35 years. I assumed my grandmother was confused, talking about the will, about logistics, about the kind of administrative details that old people worry about at the end. "I don't understand," I said. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that knew things. "You will. When it matters, you will." I didn't think about that conversation again. Not when she died, not when the funeral was held in the same church where we'd buried my mother, not when my father began referring to the family properties as if they already had his name on the deed. But sitting in that dining room on Christmas morning, with my hand resting on my still flat stomach, I suddenly remembered her words. I would understand them soon, far too soon. Brunch was served at exactly 11 o'clock. Grandma Vivian's tradition, still observed even though she was no longer there to enforce it. I barely tasted the eggs Benedict. The smoked salmon turned to paste in my mouth. Across the table, Daniel kept glancing at me, his foot pressed gently against mine under the linen tablecloth. We had planned this, rehearsed the words, waited until the coffee was poured and the conversation had settled into its usual rhythm of stock prices and golf handicaps. My father was telling Bradley about some investment opportunity, his voice carrying that particular authority he reserved for dispensing financial wisdom. Aunt Patricia was nodding along, though I doubt she was listening. Uncle Thomas caught my eye again. He raised his coffee cup slightly, a tiny toast just between us. I took a breath, then another. "I have an announcement," I said. The words came out quieter than I'd intended, but somehow they cut through everything. Forks paused, conversations stopped. 12 faces turned toward me. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my temples. Daniel reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I looked at him, his steady brown eyes, his small encouraging nod, and found my voice. "Daniel and I are expecting a baby." For one perfect moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that could have been anything: surprise, joy, the intake of breath before congratulations. Uncle Thomas smiled. Genuinely, fully smiled. And then my father stood up. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor like a warning. I watched his hand close around the edge of his plate, the Wedgwood, the irreplaceable Wedgwood, and I knew in that instant that everything was about to shatter. I just didn't know how literally. The plate hit the wall 3 feet from my head. Wedgwood doesn't shatter quietly. It explodes, a crack like a gunshot, then the high tinkling of 100 ceramic fragments hitting the floor. I didn't flinch. I was too shocked to flinch. My father's face had twisted into something I'd seen before, but never this clearly. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles stood out in his neck. His eyes, they weren't angry, they were disgusted. "You're trying to trap a man with a bastard child," he said, his voice shaking with rage, "just like your whore mother did to me." The dining room went silent. Not the polite silence of moments ago. This was the kind of silence that happens when people stop breathing. Aunt Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Bradley stared at his plate like he wished he could disappear into it. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to pause. Uncle Thomas rose to his feet. "Richard," his voice was low, dangerous. "That's enough. You're talking about my sister, your wife." "Your sister was a gold digger who saw an opportunity," my father spat. And now her daughter is doing the same thing. How far along are you, Priscilla? Did you poke holes in the condoms? That's how Eleanor did it. Richard! Uncle Thomas took a step forward. Daniel was already standing, his chair knocked backward, placing himself between me and my father like a shield. But I didn't need a shield, not anymore. I stood up slowly. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Something had gone cold inside me. Cold and clear, like the first breath of winter. "Thank you," I said, and my voice didn't waver. "You just said out loud what you've thought for 28 years. I didn't run. I walked. Past the shattered plate. Past my father's sputtering rage. Past Aunt Patricia's frozen horror and Bradley's downturned eyes. I kept my spine straight and my shoulders back, exactly the way my grandmother had taught me. Daniel's hand found the small of my back as we moved toward the door. I could hear my father's voice behind us, shouting something about disrespect and ingratitude, but the words blurred together into meaningless noise. We were almost to the car when Uncle Thomas caught up with us. "Priscilla, wait!" I stopped, turned. He was slightly out of breath, his face flushed with emotion. "I'm so sorry," he said. Years ago I should have. It's not your fault." "No, listen to me." He glanced back at the house, then leaned closer. His voice dropped. "Your grandmother knew exactly who he was, Priscilla. She prepared for this. There are things you need to know." Daniel's arm tightened around me. "What kind of things?" But Uncle Thomas was already pulling a business card from his wallet. "Margaret Holloway, attorney at law." "Call her," he said, pressing the card into my palm, "when you're ready. And Priscilla," he paused, his eyes holding mine. "Whatever your father just said in there, he's been saying it for 30 years. But this time, there were witnesses." Something in the way he said it made me pause, made me tuck the card carefully into my coat pocket instead of throwing it away. In the car, I finally let myself cry. Daniel held my hand the whole drive back to Stamford, saying nothing, just being there. I didn't know it yet, but the worst was still coming. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, heard his words, felt the exact moment when the plate shattered and something inside me shattered with it. I couldn't eat, couldn't stop shaking. Daniel tried everything: tea, blankets, holding me in the darkness, but my body had gone somewhere he couldn't reach. On the third morning, I woke up with blood on the sheets. The drive to the hospital is a blur. I remember Daniel's knuckles white on the steering wheel. I remember fluorescent lights overhead, the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum, the cold gel of the ultrasound wand. I remember the silence where a heartbeat should have been. "I'm so sorry," the doctor said. Her name tag read Dr. Morrison. Her eyes were kind. "There was nothing you could have done." But that wasn't true. There was something someone could have done. Someone could have not destroyed me 3 days earlier. Later, after the procedure, a nurse came to take my vitals. She was older, with gray streaks in her hair, and the kind of face that had seen everything. "The attending noted significant emotional distress as a contributing factor," she said gently. "That's going on your medical record. It matters in case you ever need documentation." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. Daniel slept in the chair beside my bed, his hand wrapped around mine. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling the emptiness where my baby used to be. I had already named her in my mind. Hope. And now hope was gone. When they discharged me the next morning, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. My father was waiting in the lobby. He was holding white roses. The same kind he'd brought to my mother's funeral. The same kind he'd brought to Grandma Vivian's. His sorry for your loss flowers. His sympathy costume. He hadn't come to the hospital while I was losing my baby. He hadn't called. But now, here he was, standing in the lobby in his Brooks Brothers overcoat, looking concerned for anyone who might be watching. Something clicked inside me. Cold, clear, deliberate. I pulled out my phone, pretended to check the time, pressed record. There you are, my father said, walking toward me with the roses extended. I heard what happened. It's probably for the best. I didn't respond, just looked at him. These things happen for a reason, Priscilla. He tried to hand me the flowers. I didn't take them. Your mother's pregnancy was a mistake too, but at least now you won't repeat it. The lobby was mostly empty, just a few nurses at the station, an elderly man reading a newspaper. None of them were close enough to hear. Now you can come home, my father continued. No complications, no bastard child to explain to people. We can all just move forward. I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. His hand found mine and squeezed. A warning, a question. I met my father's eyes. You came all this way, I said quietly, to tell me you're glad my baby is dead. He blinked. For a moment, just a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar dismissiveness. I came to bring you home. No, I said. You came because you think you've won. I turned and walked away, Daniel at my side, my phone still recording in my pocket. I know this is heavy. If you've ever felt unseen by someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally, you understand exactly why I'm telling this story. Before I show you what happened next, how one phone call changed everything, hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this ends. And leave me a comment. Did you ever have a moment when you finally saw someone's true face? The calls started the next day. My phone would ring, show my father's number, and I would let it go to voicemail. Each message was the same, controlled, reasonable, laced with the quiet threat of a man who wasn't used to being ignored. Priscilla, we need to talk about New Year's. The family will be gathering, and it would look very strange if you weren't there. Delete. Priscilla, I've spoken with Pastor Williams. He's concerned about you, about your state of mind. Delete. Priscilla, I'm trying to be patient here. Don't make me come to you. On the third day, Aunt Patricia sent a text. Your father is embarrassed enough. Don't make this worse by being dramatic. We've all agreed to pretend Christmas didn't happen. The least you could do is show up. I showed Daniel. His jaw tightened. Show up to what? So he can humiliate you again? But it was the fourth message that made me finally call Uncle Thomas. Priscilla. My father's voicemail voice had gone cold. You have 2 days to decide if you want to be part of this family or not. If you don't come to New Year's, I'll be forced to tell Pastor Williams and the congregation about your mental health struggles, your history of instability. The miscarriage was probably a blessing. You're clearly not fit to be a mother. Think about that. I listened to it 3 times. Then I pulled Margaret Holloway's card from my wallet and dialed Uncle Thomas. I'm ready to understand, I said when he answered. What did Grandma leave me? There was a pause. Then quietly, everything, Priscilla. She left you everything. Richard just doesn't know it yet. Uncle Thomas came to my apartment the next evening. He looked older than I remembered, more gray at his temples, deeper lines around his eyes. But when he hugged me, he felt like the only real family I had left. I should have told you years ago, he said, settling into my second-hand armchair. But Mom made me promise to wait. She said you wouldn't need it unless Richard went too far. What exactly did she leave? He pulled a folder from his briefcase, thin but heavy with meaning. 4 properties: the Tudor house in Old Greenwich, a condo in Hartford, the summer cottage on Cape Cod, and a parcel of land in Westport that's been in the family for 80 years. Total value, roughly $3.2 million. I stared at him. That's supposed to go to my father. That's what everyone said. That's what Richard told everyone. Uncle Thomas opened the folder. Mom's original will left everything to Eleanor, your mother, and after Eleanor died, it transferred to you, held in trust until you turned 25 or until Richard's claims could be evaluated. Evaluated? Mom added a codicil, 5 years before she died, completely separate from the main will. Richard never knew about it. He handed me a document and I saw my grandmother's elegant signature at the bottom. She called it her insurance policy. I read the key paragraph twice before the words made sense. In the event that Richard Fairmont is proven to have engaged in emotional abuse, public humiliation, or any action that directly harms the physical or mental well-being of my daughter Eleanor or my granddaughter Priscilla, all inheritance rights claimed by said Richard Fairmont shall be immediately and irrevocably forfeited. Proven how? I whispered. Uncle Thomas smiled grimly. That's where Margaret comes in. Margaret Holloway's office was exactly what you'd expect from a Harvard Law graduate with 35 years of practice. Mahogany walls, leather chairs, and diplomas arranged with the precision of someone who had earned every single one. She was smaller than I'd imagined, barely 5'2", with silver hair pulled back in a French twist and reading glasses perched on her nose. But her handshake was firm, and her eyes missed nothing. Your grandmother was one of the sharpest women I ever knew, Margaret said, gesturing for me and Uncle Thomas to sit. She spent the last decade of her life preparing for exactly this scenario. She knew my father would. She suspected. Richard is not a complicated man, Priscilla. He wanted the Ashworth money. He married your mother to get it. And when your mother died, he assumed he'd inherit through you. Margaret opened a leather portfolio. What he didn't know is that Vivian restructured everything after Eleanor's death. The properties are held in a trust with a forfeiture clause. The codicil, I said. Exactly. But a codicil requires evidence to activate, documentation of abuse, witnesses, proof that Richard violated the terms. I thought about Christmas morning, the shattered plate, the word whore echoing off the walls. There are witnesses, Uncle Thomas said. Everyone at that table heard what he said. Family witnesses are helpful but not sufficient on their own. Margaret leaned forward. However, Thomas, did you do what I asked? Uncle Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I started recording when Richard stood up. I have the entire thing. Margaret's smile was thin and satisfied. That's one piece of evidence. Connecticut is a one-party consent state. The recording is admissible. One piece? I asked. We'll need more. Fortunately, Margaret looked at me. I suspect Richard isn't done yet. Margaret was right. My father wasn't finished. Over the next 2 weeks, his campaign escalated from phone calls to something far more strategic. The first sign came from my principal. Mrs. Delgado called me into her office on a Tuesday morning, her expression careful. Priscilla, I received an anonymous email about you. Allegations about mental instability, erratic behavior. She held up a hand before I could respond. I don't believe any of it. Your evaluations have always been exemplary, but I wanted you to know. Anonymous. But I recognized my father's fingerprints. Then Daniel came home with news that his engineering firm had lost a major contract, a building inspection deal with Hartford Insurance, where my father had connections going back 20 years. They cited concerns about reliability, Daniel said, his jaw tight. My boss asked if I had any personal issues that might affect my work. The third blow was the cruelest. A woman from my church small group texted me. Priscilla, I don't know how to say this, but your father came to Pastor Williams. He told him you're having a breakdown, that the miscarriage made you unstable. Pastor thinks you should take some time away from ministry. I sat on my apartment floor, back against the wall, staring at my phone. For a moment, just a moment, I thought about running, about packing our things and moving somewhere my father couldn't reach, starting over, forgetting the inheritance, the will, all of it. Maybe we should just leave, I told Daniel that night. Let him have everything. What's the point of fighting? He knelt down in front of me, took my hands. If we run now, he wins, and he'll do this to someone else. Maybe our future children. I looked at my mother's scarf, draped over the bedroom chair. I'm so tired, I whispered. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother. She was sitting in her study, the one with the oak file cabinets and the window overlooking the rose garden. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with those sharp gray eyes and nodded toward the desk. I woke up at 3 in the morning, heart pounding. When the time comes, go to Margaret. She has what you'll need. I wasn't the 12-year-old girl who believed that if she made herself small enough, her father might love her. I wasn't the woman who stood silently at Christmas dinner while he called her mother a whore. I was Vivian Ashworth's granddaughter, and Vivian Ashworth didn't run. The next morning, I called Margaret. I have a second recording, I said. From the hospital lobby. My father on camera saying my baby's death was for the best. That my mother's pregnancy was a mistake. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Can you send it to me? I did. Watched the upload bar fill, felt something settle in my chest. An hour later, she called back. Priscilla, this is more than enough. Between Thomas's video from Christmas, your recording from the hospital, and the medical records documenting stress-related pregnancy loss, we can activate the forfeiture clause. What happens next? I'll file for a supplemental will reading. All interested parties will be legally required to attend, including your father. I heard the satisfaction in her voice. He'll be served papers by the end of the week. And he'll know what's coming? He'll know there's a hearing. He won't know what's in the codicil until I read it aloud. Your grandmother wanted him to hear it in front of witnesses. I closed my eyes, took a breath. Do it. Right now, I'm about to walk into a room with the man who destroyed my family and my child. If you've ever faced someone who thought they were untouchable, you know exactly how heavy that door feels. Stay with me, because what happens next is why I made this video. Drop a comment. I'm still here. Let me know you're with me. Now, let me tell you about that hearing. The supplemental will reading was scheduled for January 15th at 10 in the morning. I arrived early, wearing my mother's navy blazer, the one she'd worn in her law school graduation photo. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, even after 16 years. Margaret's conference room was smaller than I expected. A long table of polished walnut, leather chairs, a portrait of my grandmother hung on the far wall, painted when she was 60, still formidable, her eyes seeming to follow everyone in the room. Uncle Thomas was already there, sitting near the window. He rose when I entered, pulled me into a brief hug. You ready? He asked. No, but I'm here. Margaret entered with a stack of folders, each labeled with the name of a property. She set them on the table with deliberate precision. The other parties should arrive shortly, she said. Remember, you don't need to say anything. Let the documents speak. At exactly 9:55, the door opened. My father walked in first, wearing the charcoal Tom Ford suit he reserved for important business meetings. Aunt Patricia followed, clutching her Chanel purse like a security blanket. Bradley trailed behind them, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. My father scanned the room, saw me, saw Uncle Thomas, saw the portrait of Grandma Vivian watching from the wall. His expression flickered, just for a moment. What is this about, Margaret? He asked, settling into a chair across from me. I have a meeting at noon. Margaret straightened her papers. This is a supplemental reading of Vivian Ashworth's last will and testament. There are provisions that were not disclosed in the original probate. Provisions? My father's eyes narrowed. What provisions? Margaret smiled, thin, professional, razor-sharp. Shall we begin? Margaret placed a single document at the center of the table. In 2019, Mrs. Ashworth added a codicil to her will. A supplemental provision that operates independently of the primary inheritance structure. She looked directly at my father. You were not notified of this codicil, Mr. Fairmont, because its activation conditions had not been met. My father leaned forward. Activation conditions? Margaret, I've known you for 30 years. Stop playing games. I assure you this is not a game. Margaret opened the document. The codicil contains a forfeiture clause. Shall I read the relevant section? Get on with it. I watched my father's face as Margaret began. In the event that Richard Fairmont is proven to have engaged in emotional abuse, public humiliation, or any action that directly harms the physical or mental well-being of my daughter Eleanor or my granddaughter Priscilla, all inheritance rights claimed by said Richard Fairmont shall be immediately and irrevocably forfeited. Such forfeiture shall result in the transfer of all assets previously designated to Mr. Fairmont, into a protected trust for the sole benefit of my granddaughter Priscilla Fairmont, to be administered by Margaret Holloway as trustee. Silence. My father's face had gone pale, then red. "This is absurd," he said. "You can't prove—" "Actually, Mr. Fairmont, I can." Margaret closed the document. Mrs. Ashworth anticipated that proof would eventually become available. She was a patient woman. Aunt Patricia was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Bradley had stopped pretending to be bored. My father stood, pressing his palms flat against the table. "This will never hold up in court. My mother-in-law was senile. I'll contest every word." Margaret reached for a second folder. "I thought you might say that, which is why we have documentation." Margaret turned on the television mounted on the conference room wall. This footage was recorded on Christmas morning of this year in the dining room of the Ashworth estate. The recording was made by Thomas Ashworth. She pressed play. The screen filled with the dining room, the Wedgwood china, the crystal stemware. My face, nervous but hopeful, as I stood to make my announcement. "Daniel and I are expecting a baby." Then my father's chair scraping back, his hand closing around the plate. The sound, that terrible shattering sound, as it exploded against the wall. And his voice, unmistakable. "You're trying to trap a man with a bastard child, just like your whore mother did to me." Aunt Patricia made a small, strangled noise. Her hand flew to her mouth. Bradley stared at the screen like he was seeing his uncle for the first time. On the video, Uncle Thomas's voice cut in. "Richard, that's enough. You're talking about my sister, your wife." My father's face on screen twisted with contempt. "Your sister was a gold digger who saw an opportunity." Margaret paused the video. The room was utterly silent. My father's real face, the one sitting across from me, had gone the color of old ash. His hands were trembling slightly. "You recorded me." His voice was barely a whisper. "Thomas, you—" "I recorded the truth," Uncle Thomas said quietly. "The same truth you've been hiding for 30 years. This is entrapment. This is a one-party consent state, Mr. Fairmont." Margaret's voice was ice. "Thomas was present in the room. He had every legal right to record, and Mrs. Ashworth's codicil specifically allows for video evidence." My father sat back down slowly. "There's more," Margaret said. "Priscilla?" I stood up. My hands weren't shaking. My voice was steady. Something had settled inside me, the calm that comes when you finally stop hiding. 3 days after Christmas, I said, I miscarried. The medical records, which Margaret has copies of, cite significant emotional distress as a contributing factor. I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. When I was discharged from the hospital, my father was waiting in the lobby. He brought flowers. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the television. He didn't know I was recording. I pressed play. The hospital lobby appeared on screen, white roses in my father's hands, his practiced expression of concern. "There you are. I heard what happened. It's probably for the best." Aunt Patricia sucked in a breath. "These things happen for a reason, Priscilla. Your mother's pregnancy was a mistake too, but at least now you won't repeat it." Bradley's chair creaked as he leaned away from his uncle. "Now you can come home. No complications. No bastard child to explain to people." I stopped the video. The silence was absolute. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. "You called my mother a whore," I said, and my voice didn't waver. "You told me my baby's death was for the best. You came to the hospital not to comfort me, but to celebrate." My father's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Priscilla," he started. "I'm not finished." I held up my hand. "You've been talking for 28 years. Now it's my turn." I turned to Margaret. "Is this sufficient evidence to activate the forfeiture clause?" Margaret's smile was small and precise. "More than sufficient." Margaret opened the property folders one by one. "Based on the evidence presented, Video documentation of emotional abuse and public humiliation witnessed by multiple family members, combined with medical records documenting stress-related pregnancy loss. The forfeiture clause of Vivian Ashworth's codicil is hereby activated. She began to read. Property 1, the Tudor-style residence at 47 Hillcrest Lane, Old Greenwich, Connecticut. Assessed value, $1.4 million, transferring to the Priscilla Fairmont Trust. My father's hand slammed down on the table. This is illegal. This is... Property 2, Margaret continued, unmoved. The condominium at 892 Prospect Avenue, Hartford, Connecticut. Assessed value, $420,000, transferring to the Priscilla Fairmont Trust. I'll sue. I'll take this to every court in the state. Property 3, the summer cottage at 15 Ocean View Road, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Assessed value, $850,000, transferring to the Priscilla Fairmont Trust. Aunt Patricia was crying now. Not for me, I was sure, but for the shattering of the comfortable fiction she'd built around her brother. Property 4, undeveloped parcel, Westport, Connecticut. Assessed value, $530,000, transferring to the Priscilla Fairmont Trust. Margaret closed the final folder. Total assets transferred, approximately $3.2 million. Mr. Fairmont, your claims to the Ashworth estate are hereby forfeited. My father stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. This isn't over, he said, pointing at me, at Uncle Thomas, at Margaret. I'll contest this. I'll prove the old woman was incompetent. Mrs. Ashworth underwent 3 independent psychiatric evaluations in 2019, Margaret said calmly. All 3 confirmed full mental competency. The documentation is in your packet. She slid a thick folder across the table toward him. You're welcome to try, Mr. Fairmont, but I wouldn't recommend it. My father turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something other than contempt in his eyes. Fear. Priscilla. His voice had changed, softer now, almost pleading. We can work this out. We're family. You're still my daughter. I looked at him for a long moment. This was the man who had told a 12-year-old that she was a trap, who had spent 16 years making me feel like a mistake, who had called my mother a whore in front of relatives and then shown up at the hospital to tell me my baby's death was for the best. And now he wanted to negotiate. I stood up slowly, gathered my coat, wrapped my mother's scarf around my shoulders. I stopped being your daughter, I said, the day you told a 12-year-old girl that she was evidence of your biggest mistake. He flinched. Today, I'm not your daughter. I'm not your obligation. I'm not your shame. I picked up my purse, looked him directly in the eyes. Today, I'm just someone collecting what my grandmother left me. Priscilla, please. You didn't lose me today, Richard. I used his first name deliberately. You lost me 16 years ago when you made a little girl believe she was worthless. Today, you just lost everything else. I turned and walked toward the door. Uncle Thomas fell into step beside me. He didn't say anything, just put his hand briefly on my shoulder. Behind us, I heard my father slump back into his chair, heard Aunt Patricia's shocked whisper, heard Bradley say, I think we should go. I didn't look back. The door closed behind me, and I stepped into the January sunlight, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Free. My father hired 3 different lawyers over the next 2 months. The first was his regular attorney, a corporate litigator who specialized in mergers and acquisitions. That man took one look at the codicil, the videos, and the psychiatric evaluations, and withdrew from the case within a week. The second was a probate specialist from New Haven. He filed a motion to contest the will on grounds of undue influence, claiming that Uncle Thomas had manipulated Grandma Vivian into adding the codicil. The motion was denied. The judge noted that Uncle Thomas had no financial stake in the outcome since all assets went to me. The third was a legal aid attorney my father found after his funds started running low. That one at least made it to a hearing. I sat in the courtroom, Margaret beside me, watching my father's lawyer argue that the codicil was excessively punitive and designed to entrap. The judge listened patiently, then she watched both videos. When the Christmas recording ended, when my father's voice filled the courtroom saying, "Whore mother," I saw the judge's expression harden. Her ruling took less than 5 minutes. The codicil is legally sound. The evidence is admissible under Connecticut's one-party consent statute. The forfeiture clause is activated. She looked at my father over her glasses. Case dismissed. Outside the courthouse, Margaret shook my hand. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said. My father's legal fees, by the end, totaled $84,000. He had to sell his car, the Lexus he was so proud of, to cover part of it. Some people thought I should feel guilty about that. But guilt is for people who've done something wrong. All I did was stand there and let my father show the world exactly who he was. The community found out faster than I expected. I never told anyone outside of the family what happened. I didn't need to. Aunt Patricia, in her desperation to defend her brother, told the wrong person at church, a woman named Gloria who had been friends with my grandmother for 40 years. Gloria told her book club. The book club told the women's auxiliary. Within 3 weeks, everyone at First Presbyterian knew that Richard Fairmont had called his late wife a whore, blamed his daughter for her own miscarriage, and lost $3 million because his mother-in-law had seen through him decades ago. The church board asked him to step down from his position. He'd been a member for 25 years. His insurance company quietly offered early retirement. The official reason was restructuring, but Daniel's boss, whose contract had mysteriously been restored, told us the real story. Richard had become a liability. Clients didn't want to work with him. The invitations stopped coming. No more golf foursomes at the country club. No more neighborhood barbecues. The couples who had been their closest friends for decades suddenly couldn't remember the Fairmonts' number. I didn't orchestrate any of this. I didn't have to. The same community my father had spent 30 years cultivating turned their backs in 30 days. Not because I asked them to, but because he'd finally shown them exactly who he was. One Sunday, I saw him from across the grocery store parking lot. He was loading bags into a Honda Civic, not a Lexus. His shoulders were hunched, his hair had gone grayer. He looked up, saw me. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then I got in my car and drove away. There was nothing left to say. The property transfers took 6 months to finalize. Margaret walked me through each one. The Tudor house, the Hartford condo, the Cape Cod cottage, the Westport land. By July, all 4 were officially held in the trust that bore my name. I stood in the doorway of Grandma Vivian's house on the day the last document was signed. The rose garden was in full bloom, the way she would have wanted it. The grandfather clock in the foyer still chimed on the hour. "What do you want to do with all of this?" Daniel asked, slipping his arm around my waist. I had thought about selling, taking the money and starting fresh somewhere far away, somewhere my father's shadow couldn't reach. But standing there, with my mother's scarf around my neck and my grandmother's portrait watching from the hall, I realized something. This wasn't his legacy. It was theirs. And I wasn't going to let him take that from me, too. "I want to keep the house," I said. "Turn it into something that helps people. Something that would make Grandma proud." Daniel smiled. "What did you have in mind?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Of all the properties transferred to my trust, one was the Hartford condo. The same building where my father had been forced to move after selling his own house to pay his legal fees. He was, technically, my tenant now. I could have evicted him. Some people said I should have. Instead, I let him stay. Not out of forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. But because, unlike him, I didn't need to destroy someone to feel whole, he moved out anyway, 2 months later. Some prisons don't have walls. Margaret gave me the letter in August. She had held on to it for 2 years, following my grandmother's explicit instructions. "Give this to Priscilla only after Richard has lost everything. She'll need it then." The envelope was cream-colored, my grandmother's handwriting still elegant despite the tremor that had plagued her final months. My name on the front, nothing else. I waited until I was alone to open it. Sat in her study, in her chair, looking out at the rose garden she had loved so much. My darling Priscilla, if you're reading this, then Richard finally showed the world who he truly is. I'm sorry I wasn't there to see it. But in a way, I've been waiting for this moment for 30 years. I knew what he was the first time I saw him look at your mother. He didn't see Eleanor. He saw an opportunity. I should have stopped the wedding, but Eleanor loved him, and I couldn't break her heart. When she died, I made a promise. I would protect you the way I failed to protect her. The codicil was my insurance policy. I knew Richard would eventually reveal himself. Men like him always do. I just needed to give you the evidence and the courage to use it. Your mother was the best thing that ever happened to this family. And you, my darling, are her legacy. You have her kindness, her strength, her quiet fire. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Never let anyone make you feel small. I am so proud of you. All my love, always, Grandma. I sat there for a long time after I finished reading. The tears came eventually, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of healing, of finally being seen. 1 year later, I got married in my grandmother's garden. It was a small ceremony, just Uncle Thomas, a few close friends, Daniel's parents who had driven up from Pennsylvania. We didn't need a grand affair. We didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I wore my mother's Hermes scarf as a belt, wrapped around the waist of a simple white dress. Something borrowed from her, something that kept her close. Uncle Thomas walked me down the makeshift aisle between the rose bushes. When the officiant asked who gave this woman, his voice cracked. Her mother, he said. Her grandmother. And me. Daniel cried during his vows. I didn't. I had done enough crying that year, but I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. At the reception, we set up tables on the back lawn. The caterer used Grandma Vivian's Wedgwood china, all except one place setting. That plate had never been replaced. You could buy a new one, Daniel said, noticing the gap. Complete the set. I shook my head. Some things should stay broken, as a reminder of what we survived. Uncle Thomas made a toast. He talked about my mother, her laugh, her warmth, the way she used to sing in the kitchen while making breakfast. He talked about Grandma Vivian, her iron will, her fierce love, her refusal to let anyone hurt the people she protected. Eleanor would be so proud of you, he said, raising his glass. Not because of the houses or the money, but because you stood up in a way she never could. I lifted my champagne and looked at Daniel, at the garden, at the portrait of my grandmother visible through the study window. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged exactly where I was standing. Over the months that followed, I learned more about my mother than I had ever known. Uncle Thomas became a regular visitor. He'd drive down from New Haven on Sundays, and we'd sit in the garden with cups of coffee while he shared stories I had never heard. How Eleanor used to sneak out to meet him at the ice cream shop when they were teenagers. How she'd cried when their father died, but stood strong for their mother. How she had known deep down that marrying Richard was a mistake, but couldn't bring herself to disappoint everyone who had already sent wedding gifts. She told me once, Uncle Thomas said, that you were the only good thing to come out of that marriage. She said you made it all worth it. I kept her scarf on the armchair in the study, touched it every time I walked past. In October, I received a letter from Bradley, my cousin, Richard's nephew, the golden child who had never once stood up for me. Priscilla, he wrote, I should have said something that morning. I should have defended you, or at least not sat there like a coward. I can't undo what happened, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. You deserved better. I read it 3 times, didn't reply for 2 weeks. When I finally wrote back, I kept it short. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. Aunt Patricia sent a letter too, eventually. It was longer, full of explanations and justifications and half apologies that never quite acknowledged what she had allowed to happen. I read it once, put it in a drawer. Maybe someday I'd be ready to respond. But not yet. Some doors take longer to open than others. I still think about Hope. That was her name in my heart. The baby I lost. The future that was taken. Some nights I lie awake and wonder what she would have looked like. Whether she would have had Daniel's eyes or my mother's smile. Grief doesn't move in a straight line. Some days I'm fine. Other days, I see a mother with a stroller in the grocery store and have to leave before I start crying. But I've stopped blaming myself. For a while, I carried the weight of it. The guilt that maybe if I'd been stronger, calmer, less affected by my father's words, Hope would still be here. My therapist calls that survivor's guilt. She says it's common in women who've experienced trauma during pregnancy. Your father's actions contributed to your stress, she told me. That's in your medical records, but miscarriage is complex. It's not your fault. It was never your fault. I'm learning to believe her. Daniel and I are trying again. Carefully, without pressure, without timelines. Some months I take pregnancy tests with shaking hands. So far, nothing. But we have time. And we have each other. Last month, I went back to teaching full-time. My students made me a welcome back card covered in glitter glue and misspelled words. We missed you, Ms. Fairmont. Welcome home. I hung it on my refrigerator, next to a photo of my mother and a dried rose from Grandma Vivian's garden. Home, I've realized, isn't a building. It's not 4 properties worth $3.2 million. It's not even the Tudor house where I grew up attending awkward Christmas brunches. Home is the people who love you, the ones who see you as you are, not as evidence of their mistakes. I'm building that home now, one day at a time. I hear about my father occasionally. Small updates that filter through the family network, usually from Bradley's awkward attempts at bridge building. He's living alone now in a 1-bedroom apartment in Waterbury. Aunt Patricia keeps her distance, partly out of embarrassment, partly because her husband finally admitted that he never liked Richard anyway. The congregation that once respected him now whispers when he walks past. The business contacts who used to take his calls let them go to voicemail. The country club membership he treasured was quietly not renewed. He sent me one letter, about 4 months after the hearing. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope. Sharp, precise, the same penmanship that had signed my birthday cards with nothing but father. I stood in my kitchen for 10 minutes holding it before I finally opened it. Priscilla, it said, I think we should talk. There have been misunderstandings on both sides. I'm willing to put the past behind us if you are. Call me. That was it. No acknowledgement of what he'd done, no apology, just a demand, dressed up as an offer. I read it twice. Then I walked to the garbage can and dropped it in. Daniel found me sitting on the back porch later, watching the sunset over the rose garden. You okay? He asked. Yeah. I leaned against his shoulder. I thought I'd feel something, anger, guilt, something. What do you feel? I thought about it for a long moment. Nothing, I said. And that's okay. Some people don't deserve space in your heart, even if they're family. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't require reconciliation. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is close a door and walk away. I closed that door a long time ago. Christmas came again, as it always does. This time, I was ready. Daniel and I hosted at the Tudor house. Our house now, though it still felt strange to say it. We invited Uncle Thomas, of course, Daniel's parents, a few friends from the school where I teach. Margaret Holloway even stopped by for champagne, though she stayed only an hour. Your grandmother would have loved seeing this house full of laughter again, she said before leaving. We set the table with the Wedgwood china, 11 place settings instead of 12. The gap where the broken plate used to sit remained empty. Are you ever going to replace it? Daniel's mother asked, noticing. No, I said. I'm keeping it that way on purpose. She didn't understand. That was okay. Some lessons are personal. After dinner, While Daniel was teaching his father how to play chess, and Uncle Thomas was dozing in the armchair by the fire, I slipped away to the study. The portrait of my grandmother looked down at me from the wall. Her eyes, the same gray-green as mine, seemed to hold a secret. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for believing in me before I believed in myself." I touched the frame, thought about everything that had happened in the past year, the loss, the betrayal, the slow, painful process of rebuilding. And I thought about hope, my baby, my almost was, my gentle reminder that some things are taken from us before we're ready. "I'm still here," I whispered, to my grandmother, to my mother, to Hope, to myself. "I'm still here." The fire crackled in the next room. Someone laughed. The smell of cinnamon and pine filled the house. For the first time in years, Christmas felt like coming home. If you've made it this far, I want to share something with you. I spent 28 years believing I was unlovable, that I was a mistake, that the only way to survive was to make myself small, invisible, undemanding. My father taught me that. Through his words, his silences, his constant reminders that I was the evidence of a trap he never wanted. But here's what I've learned. The people who tell you that you're worthless are usually the ones who are terrified of your worth. My father didn't hate me because I was unlovable. He hated me because I was proof. Proof that he had made promises he never intended to keep. Proof that he had taken advantage of a woman who loved him. Proof that even after she died, he couldn't escape the consequences of his own cruelty. I was his mirror, and he couldn't stand what he saw. If someone in your life makes you feel small, I want you to know that says everything about them and nothing about you. Blood doesn't make someone family, behavior does. You don't owe your silence to people who have harmed you. You don't owe forgiveness to people who aren't sorry. You don't owe reconciliation to people who haven't changed. What you owe yourself is the truth, the courage to speak it, and the boundaries to protect your peace. I'm not telling this story for revenge. I'm telling it because for years, I thought I was alone. I thought my father's contempt was normal. His cruelty was earned. His anger was my fault. It wasn't. It never was. And if you've ever felt that way, invisible, blamed, ashamed, I want you to know, you are not a mistake. You are not a burden. You are not too much. You are enough. I keep my mother's Hermes scarf on the armchair in the study now, the same study where my grandmother used to sit, planning and protecting, watching Richard from a distance for 30 years. Sometimes I pick it up and hold it to my face. The perfume has long since faded, but if I close my eyes, I can almost remember how she smelled. Rose and vanilla, warmth and safety. My mother never got to meet Daniel, never got to see me become a teacher or stand up to my father or inherit the house she grew up in. Cancer stole those moments from her, and from me. But I carry her with me anyway, in the scarf, in my grandmother's garden, in the way I'm learning to love myself the way she loved me. "You would have liked him, Mom," I say sometimes when Daniel isn't listening. "He's kind. He sees me." The scarf hangs on the chair, and every Christmas morning, I wrap it around my shoulders before I go downstairs. It's not a reminder of what I lost. It's proof of what I found. There's a shelf in the dining room where the broken plate used to sit. When I bought a new china cabinet for the Wedgwood set, Daniel suggested filling the gap with something, a vase maybe, or a photograph. I thought about it for a long time. Eventually, I placed a single white candle there instead. Unlit. Unburned. "What does it mean?" Daniel asked. "It's a space for what was taken," I said. "And a reminder that I'm still standing. Some wounds never fully heal. I still have nightmares sometimes. The crash of porcelain, the word horror echoing off the walls, the cold fluorescent lights of the hospital room. But I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about integrating, taking the broken pieces and finding a way to live alongside them. My father tried to destroy me, first with words, then with silence, then with the deliberate cruelty of celebrating my baby's death. He failed. I'm still here. I'm still teaching. I'm still married to a man who loves me. I'm still living in my grandmother's house, surrounded by her roses and her memories. The empty space on the shelf isn't a wound anymore. It's proof that I survived. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between peace and family, between silence and truth, I hope you know you're not alone. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Check the description for more stories like this one, and leave me a comment. What's one boundary you wish you had set sooner? I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourself. You matter. If you want more stories of resilience, truth, and the courage to stand up when it matters most, check the links in the description below. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. See you in the next one.